Oh, I'm I'm in charge this morning. Uh, Hello, welcome to R&R. I'm Phil,
And I'm Jill.
and together we are Phil and
Jill.
nailed it 2 weeks running.
Yeah, pretty good.
So yes, this is R&R. This is our weekly time on a Saturday morning to bring some recommendations to you for things you might want to do to fill some time, whether that's watching a film, reading a book, or listening to some music. And I think we've been in this a couple of weeks now. Maybe now is the time to reiterate that these are our suggestions to you based on what we enjoy. Because I think Jill's been checking out some of my recommendations from previous weeks and felt they were slightly niche.
Yes, yes. So me and my sister had a treaty evening when I went to see her. She's in my bubble. And we thought, oh, Phil recommended Tag. Let's watch Tag. So she paid the whatever it was, $2.99 or $3.99.
I didn't realise she paid for it. I'm sorry.
She paid for it, and we got the wine out and the olives, and we sat down and the nice big roaring fire to watch it, and then we started watching, and we did laugh, once or twice. Anyway, then she went out to the kitchen, and I could hear all this chopping, and we were about 15 minutes in, and she came in with a big bowl of fruit with some chocolate sauce on it, and clearly she'd been out for quite a little while, and I sort of got the vibes that she wasn't really bothered about watching the film. And then the more I watched it, yeah, the language was awful. The relationships were awful. Yeah, and I'm thinking, anyway, I turned to Ginny and I said, isn't it funny what some people regard as a good film? And she said, thank goodness for that. And we turned it off. And then we watched Bombshell, which is another American film about Fox News, which I'm not going to recommend today, but it is worth watching.
So this is our disclaimer.
We are so different. Like, I think Phil's so laddish in the things that he chooses, and I'm such an old fogey lady in choosing the things that I like. Anyway, there we go. You have the perfect mix with the two of us.
So we begin with our disclaimer that we're all uniquely created by God with different...
Yes, and I'm sure there will be some people who will enjoy Tag, but that's not me.
So tell us about a book that you enjoy then, Jill.
Well, this book, now some of you will have heard me mention this on morning prayer one morning, because we had a whole conversation going about, I couldn't remember the title, what the craw, and I thought it was craw birds thing. And I couldn't remember it because I listened to it on Audible, so I didn't have the book in my hands, where the crawdads sing. And we learned that the crawdads are crayfish, and that they do make this funny noise out in the marshes. So this book, I'm just going to read to you a couple of synopses about what it's about, because if I say it, I'll either let the whole plot go or I'll get it wrong. So just forgive me for reading this. So Audible says this: for years, rumours of the Marsh Girl have haunted Berkeley Cove, a quiet town on the North Carolina coast. So in late 1969, when handsome Chase Andrews is found dead, the locals immediately suspect Kaya Clark, the so-called Marsh Girl. But Kaya is not what they say. Sensitive and intelligent, she has survived for years alone in the marsh that she calls home, finding friends in the gulls and lessons in the sand. Then the time comes when she yearns to be touched and loved. When two young men from town become intrigued by her wild beauty, Kaya opens herself to a new life until the unthinkable happens. So that's one synopsis. Then another one says, where the crawdads sing is the story of Kaya, a young girl who's abandoned by her family and left to fend for herself. So she's abandoned by her family at about the age of 6 already, and the family was, her father was abusive and the mother had left, and she's got brothers and sisters who left as well. Already on the outskirts of the community, in more than just her location, she rarely ventures out of the marshes and spends her days learning about the habitat around her. When she does let the outside world in, she learns that it can be both scarier and more accepting than she could ever have imagined. And it goes on, the lyrical and descriptive writing made this a very easy book to listen to and get lost in. The descriptions of the marshes were so in depth, I was almost transported there. So it was read on Audible. It's read by Cassandra Campbell, and it's got this sort of soft drawl, so I can't really do it, but she talks like this and it sort of pulls you in, and she tells the story like that, and you hear about Kaya and her love of all creation, and Kaya sort of collects like shells and feathers, and she draws them and she writes account. She can't read or write, and you know, she gets taught how to read. I can't tell the whole story, it's just beautiful. Now, I found the lyrical prose absolutely captivating. Like, you know, I would love to have been able to read, to write like she wrote, and it really drew me in. And I think because, you know, I had the earplugs in my ear and I was listening and I was doing my jigsaw at the same, but it just took me to that world, and I could imagine the marshes, and I could imagine this little girl struggling for herself, and the interaction she has with some of the people in Berkeley Cove. You know, there's a black couple who look after her and give her clothing, and she collects mussels to sell them so that she can get grits to eat, you know, and she really has to fend for herself. And all that, you get this picture of this girl growing up in creation and surviving. And then the story begins to unfold, and it's a beautiful story. So it is a murder story, and it's very cleverly written and brought together, but it ultimately, and I don't want to give too much away, it's a story of redemption, and it's a beautiful story of a life that is lived well, and that, see, I don't know if I should be saying this, because if you do listen to it, I don't want to take the expense away. Anyway, another reviewer said this: what a pile of tosh. Apart from the descriptive prose around the marshes' flora and fauna, the story, non-story, was repetitive, drab and unsurprising. The dialogue could have been written by a 5-year-old and was so unnatural it felt as if I was listening to a tutorial for an essay, but boring subject. I felt obliged to finish it because it had such good reviews, but that's 12 hours I won't get back. I'm sorry I bothered. And I just don't know where that reviewer was coming from, because when I listened to it, it made me feel alive, and I longed, you know, I longed for the time when I could listen to it again and get back to the story and hear it being told, and it just really caught my imagination. I found it absolutely painfully beautiful, and it made me yearn for childhood. You know, my childhood, I was in the countryside, and we used to play in the ditches and find frogs, and you know, the whole day we were out in the fields and go on for long walks over the railway bridge and wave at the trains and find a little stream and drink from it, and then find a sheep dead in it further up. You know, those are all memories that I can remember. And you feel that there's whole worlds out there that we know nothing about, and it really brought it all home and alive to me. So anyway, you can tell I quite like that book. And I know it, oh, so sorry, I've got more to say. The book, set in 60s and 70s North America, is packed full of mystery and romance. Set in the marshes of North Carolina, it follows the life of Kaya Clark, known as the Marsh Girl. Abandoned by her family as a child, she's left to survive and learn about life, love, and everything else in between. Shunned and mocked by the residents of the nearby Berkeley Cove, for years, Kaya's only friends are the gulls and storks. with whom she shares the marsh. She develops a relationship with the boys from the town, etc., etc. But Reese Witherspoon is going to make it into a film. So in the not too distant future, she's going to be starring in it, and I can't wait to see the film, and I hope the film does justice to the book. That's it.
Brilliant. I just wondered if that reviewer who said it was Tosh at the end says, "I'm off to watch Tag now."
Touche. Do you think it's your sort of book, Phil?
I don't know. I do like a murder mystery, and the kind of Marsh girl does sound like an interesting twist.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'd have the patience for the prose. I don't know, Will.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
It might be. I'll recommend it to Esther, who I think it would be suitable for, and then she can tell me whether I'd like it or not.
Okay, good. And it was a debut novel. Sorry, did I say who it was by? It's by Delia. Oh dear. Oh, I haven't written it down. Delia Owen. It's her first novel.
I seem quite excited about finding someone's first novel. Kind of.
Yeah, well, I think it was just so well written. Anyway, okay, over to you.
Over to me. So we are talking. It's my song. It's my song this week.
Yeah.
My song, and I know you'll like this one because my song is by REM, and Jill chose "Everybody Hurts" by REM a couple of weeks ago. I'm choosing "It's the End of the World as We Know It" by REM, which is it's a wonderful song. It's a very, in some ways, weird because it's a very upbeat song in terms of the tune, but the lyrics are "It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine," and it's so it's kind of talking about the end of the end of the world and all the kind of apocalyptic, a lot of imagery about snakes and aeroplanes and all that kind of thing. And the chorus is, "It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine." It's quite uplifting, just because of the tune. But in a similar way that Jill likes "Here Comes the Sun" last week, it has a similar effect on me. The thought that actually the world is kind of falling apart all around us in many ways. But actually, when we look back at the Gospels and what Jesus was preparing his followers for after he left, what he describes as the birth pains, he said there'll be wars, there'll be rumours of wars, but don't let your hearts be troubled. I'm coming back, and that's part of what's going to happen between now and me coming back. So I don't think REM were particularly thinking about Jesus and the Book of Revelation and that kind of thing when they wrote this song. But for me, when I hear those words, it makes me think actually whatever's going on in the world, God's on top of it, and actually all the suffering and all the mess in the world at the moment is only temporary because God is coming again. So actually we can feel fine at the end of the world because we've got that hope.
That's brilliant. And I think that thing, they do it a lot in mindfulness teaching, but the thing about the impermanence of life, that it keeps on changing. And I don't know if you feel it, but I feel with the easing of lockdown, it's like, change is coming again. We've got to readapt. We've got to, change the way we do life once again. And it's the end of the world as we know it. And I don't know, life just keeps on moving on. But then there's that security that God he knows all, he's in it all, and he's actually responsible for the end of the world. And
because we have, I'm going to try and say the word again, because we have this apocalyptic idea of the end of the world, it's a very scary notion. which is why we get scared when we hear about big earthquakes and the end of the world and coronavirus and all these kind of things. But actually, the promise is actually it's a good thing, because it's when God makes things new again. It's natural to be afraid. I'm not saying we shouldn't be afraid. It's a natural thing. It's part of being human. But there's that comfort, there.
Brilliant. Yeah. Good. Thank you for that, Phil. I shall go and listen to it once more.
So that just leaves us with a film to think about, and you're choosing this week.
So,
Tag 2.
Yeah. Oh dear, I don't know. This is stark contrast to Tag 1 or Tag 2.
It's a Tag 2.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm really recommending it is not because I think it's the best film that I've watched recently. It's the only film I've watched recently, and I probably could have done a better review on the Bombshell film that I talked about last week. Anyway, it's Edie, and it's on BBC iPlayer at the moment, and it's the lead player is Sheena Hancock. Well, I like Sheila Hancock. I find her very appealing as an individual and as an actress. Anyway, can I just read the synopsis? Edith Moore, Edie, is a bitter, gruff woman in her 80s. In the months following her husband George's death, Edie's strained relationship with her daughter Nancy begins to worsen. The question over Edie's future looms large. While Edie tries hard to convince Nancy she can manage fine by herself, Nancy is making plans for her mother to move to a retirement home. Edie feels like it's the beginning of the end. See, very good. End of the world is coming, or nigh, or whatever we said. It seems she will die with all the regrets of her past intact, and one regret haunts her most of all. When Edie was married, her father planned a climbing trip for them in the Scottish Highlands. Edie yearned to go, but her husband George, a difficult and controlling man, made her stay at home. Nearly 30 years later, Edie decides to make the trip herself alone. So you have Edie, you know, having sampled a care home and not thought very much of it, ringing up her daughter and saying she's going away for a few days. Then you have her on the train with her, you know, wheelie suitcase. And as the train pulls out the station, she thinks, oh, what am I doing? And she tries to get off, but the train's already gone. And then she ends up in a Scottish town that they made much of the sign, and I can't remember where it is. Anyway, she goes on this adventure and all sorts of different things happen to her. And she is determined to climb this mountain. She's got the postcard that her dad sent her. And really, it's the story of her achieving that, but with help on the way. And there's some beautifully filmed scenery and views, but it's a little bit idealistic, all of it. It's a bit slow, you know, but I did resonate with it. And the thing is, there were some parts that were very sad. You know, she says to one of the lads who takes her walking, she says, I've had a wasted life. She's wasted her whole life. And she said to her daughter, well, I did my duty. And so her marriage was just about fulfilling her marriage promises, but it wasn't a life. And so now in her 80s, there she is doing what she's always wanted to do. And she finds freedom out there, but she's also very vulnerable. So there's a few things that happen to her that she could easily have lost her life. So if I'd been the film director, I would have made it a much better film, because it lacked a real sort of good plot. The plot could have been better. There were some continuity issues, like in one scene, you know, she just has the rucksack on her back, and the next one she's got her trekking poles, and I think, yeah, well, your trekking poles should have been on your rucksack, love. You know, it's that sort of thing. And there were quite a few of those. For a modern film, I didn't think it was good enough, really. But it's a nice, easy watch, and I think a lot of people will appreciate it as a watch. And it sort of finishes, well, at the end. And I sort of think it could have gone on a bit and been a bit more realistic and shown how her life improved because of what she'd achieved out there on the Highlands. Anyway, it's a nice film to watch. It's easy. It might not be ever so captivating for some, but I found it relaxing and comforting. And in terms of Christianity, I suppose there are different themes. There's the theme of her marriage, which she was faithful to, and yet, you know, she did put her true life on hold, which I was very sad about. And that's not God's intention for us. You know, our marriages, we're supposed to be equal partners, aren't we? And to both help one another sort of blossom and become the individuals we're created to be. So that part of it is sad, but it's also quite realistic, I thought.
Yeah, and I think maybe there is a powerful metaphor that, sorry, I've not seen the film, but I think sometimes, and I'm sure we've spoken about this before, about how actually sometimes we can boil Christianity and our faith down to that sense of duty, like we need to do this for God and we need to do that for God, but actually God's desire for us is to have a relationship with him that's deeper and allows us to be more ourselves and be fulfilled. So maybe there's a metaphor there as well for our relationship with God and what it should be versus what we sometimes either settle for or characterize it as.
And I sort of liked it because she was in her 80s and yet she was still up for the adventure. And I think the older we get, the more nervous we get about doing new things. And yet this was life-giving to her. So she was vulnerable, but unless we are vulnerable, then our relationship with God never sort of gets tested in some ways. You know, we have to let go of stuff in order to experience what it is to trust and to put one foot forward in front of the other when you've got nothing else to hold on to. Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, and I keep forgetting I'm in charge. I'm in charge this week, and that's the end of this week. So thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with another R&R. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Bye.